Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Unmentionables. I'm your host, Connor, and joining me on the line, roughly 6 inches from me, is the love of my life, my best friend, Alexa. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
Is my breath okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we're doing okay there. We tried recording from different microphones, but our internet kind of couldn't handle that. But we're here to talk to you today about small living, because once we moved to Washington from Colorado, we had to learn a lot about moving into a smaller space. When we lived in Colorado, we had a 3-bedroom house, 2 bathrooms, big backyard for our dogs. And now I would say that we have quite a bit less space. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would say that's being pretty generous. We have a lot less space. We've now consolidated down to basically 2 rooms, a travel trailer, and a large wooden shed that has been converted into like a mother-in-law suite.
Yeah, when we first moved here, we kind of moved straight into the travel trailer. You know, it's kind of exactly how you're imagining it. Small kitchen, little dining room table, really uncomfortable couch, and a bathroom that obviously neither of us wanted to use, a shower that can barely fit one person, and enough water pressure to, I don't know, at least wash your legs, but that's about it. The bedroom's okay. The bed's terribly uncomfortable, but, you know, we're still working on that. But this wooden shed, that was kind of hopefully going to be our ticket to the good life. But with that being said, it wasn't easy in the beginning. Did you want to kind of cover some of the early struggles that we had before we got things working?
Yeah, there were definitely some growing pains before we could, renovate the bathroom in the shed. We were stuck using the quote unquote bathroom in the travel trailer. There's barely any hot water. It's just kind of like a quick one and done, rinse off shower. And we were living that way for almost 2 months, right?
Yeah, honestly, I'm still shocked the way you handled that whole situation, because, I mean, for me as a guy, like, yeah, I like to get clean, but I feel like women really like to get clean, and that shower was not working for you. I mean, you like to take baths and stuff, and we came from a place that had a very big bath and a shower you had a lot of room in, and so that travel trailer just was not working. And for about 1 month and 2 weeks, you had a really good attitude about it. And then that last 2 weeks before my uncle got here and we, renovated the space, it was a little tough. It was a little tough for that last couple of weeks.
It was definitely getting hard. Like you said, we had so much room previously. And before that, I lived by myself for, 4 years. So I had a whole apartment with 2 bedrooms to myself even. So yeah, it was definitely an adjustment. We moved out here in the summer. And so kind of getting the workings of the trailer right and getting the air conditioner to work correctly was a little tough.
You just reminded me that we didn't have AC in the shed for the first year we were here. So it was just like scalding hot. I'd be sitting up in the loft, just sweating, just so I could, be on my computer at 9 o'clock at night. And then, yeah, the AC in the travel trailer, it works, but on the hottest day, it struggles for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of figuring out the little intricacies of the living space, with the air conditioner in the travel trailer. You have to turn it off every so often, otherwise it ices up and doesn't cool anything. So we had to figure that out the hard way. We had some leaks in different places.
Do you remember that issue with the sink? I forgot about this. So neither of us had any experience working with trailers. I mean, I've stayed a couple of nights in a trailer while camping, but I've never owned one. I've never really spent a lot of time with people who own them. And so moving into it, there was this situation where we had cooked this honestly super subpar crock pot meal. But we used like some really fresh meat, and it was like a really fatty piece of meat. And so we finished the meal, and then we, just kind of put everything down the drain in the kitchen. Lo and behold, it got clogged, which was disastrous because, the first day we didn't really notice, and then we started getting this smell. And, we kept washing our dishes in there and didn't really think anything of it. And then, about a week in, Alexa comes to me. She's like, hey, like this is getting like really bad. Can you maybe look at it? And so I went outside and I, emptied out the tank, and I thought it would fix it, but it didn't fix it. So we kind of assumed, oh, we have this clog from all of this like fat and stuff. So I take a day off and I wrestle with this thing. I get my stepdad involved, and him and I are both going at it. We just try to like clear out these drains, and the whole house, it smelled like rotting fat and grossness. It was so disgusting. But long story long, we couldn't figure out what was clogging it. And so we put it all back together, and we're looking up, information on the trailer, and there's a third valve to like let out the water. So it was just a full tank the entire time. So I go outside and I empty out the tank that had never been emptied out, mind you. And that fixed that problem.
It's funny that you say that, though, because when you said, the problem with the sink, it was pretty vague. And I thought, which one?
I guess we've had a couple of problems with sinks.
Yeah. No, it's been fine. We had to get into the groove. I think just getting used to your space and how to live in it more efficiently. It takes time, whether you're moving into a larger space or a smaller space, just anything particularly different from what you're used to. It's kind of figuring out by, I think, trial and error, what's going to work best for your space.
I agree. And I think that it's important that we don't just talk about like the negatives, because I mean, in all honesty, our day-to-day life right now is pretty comfortable, I would say.
I would agree.
Would you say that you're happy with the amount of space you have?
Right now, I'm very happy with our living space. I don't feel a large need for more space. There are times when things would be a little bit easier, or I could think of what to do with more space, but it's not necessary at the moment. I think that we have made our space really functional, but also really comfortable for us. And I think that it serves its purpose of being a safe place for us to, be together and be with our dogs and, be able to leave everything else outside.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of go into maybe some of the ideas that we've had to maximize the amount of space we have. Because like I said, the majority of our living space is it's a wooden shed. I mean, there's no other way to put it. We converted it with the help of my uncle JR into a mother-in-law suite. It now has a fully functional bathroom, toilet, sink, decent sized shower. I mean, we think we're pretty happy with that. We have our own closet. We have a little living room, little laundry space. And then up in the loft, which is where we are now, we have a reading nook. As far as our living room goes, or our little living area, one of the first ideas that you had was finding a way to separate it from the rest of the space to kind of make it feel like its own room. What made you get that idea, or where did that come from? Because I think it was one of the most important aspects of making our space feel bigger.
Yeah, so I've always really kind of toyed with the idea of different living spaces. As you know, I've never wanted to spend forever in just one place. And so I've always kind of expected that I would live in different situations. So it's always been interesting to me seeing how people make their lives in different conditions and different circumstances. So that idea came a lot from apartment therapy on YouTube, actually. And they mostly do a lot of tours of small living spaces that are in New York. So as you can expect, they are all very small, even the expensive ones. So I saw how a lot of people would separate their spaces in different ways, whether it's with furniture or, even curtains. So we ended up really going with like room divider panels. They're, those 3-piece wooden panels that kind of fold into itself and then fold out. I liked the ability to move those around really easily. They're light and can be folded up into a smaller space, which I think is important when you have a small space like this, not only for it to be functional for day-to-day use, but also for us to be able to alter it easily for the given situation. If one of us wants to work out in the living room, we have an ottoman that we can push out of the way and open up that space. And with those room dividers, we can open and close them more depending on, what kind of privacy one of us needs, or, if we're blocking out light.
Yeah. And the biggest question I think most people have is when going from a large 3-bedroom house to a small, 1-bedroom or even studio sized living space, is how do you make room for everything? And I think we had to make a lot of sacrifices when we first moved. We got rid of, I would say, roughly 2/3 of our stuff, most of our furniture. And then when we moved out here, it ended up being kind of this nice blessing in disguise, where now we have such limited space that when we think about buying something, we have to really decide, hey, is this something that I want to buy? And if it is, where does it go? Because I can't just go on Amazon while, I'm drunk or whatever and just buy 50,000 things because there's just nowhere for me to put it. So it kind of forced us to really look at what we have and to maybe gain a little bit of a different perspective on the stuff that we own.
Yeah, I think that especially in, our capitalist society that really encourages consumption, I think that it's easy to consume. And what's nice about, our small space is it does make you reconsider your purchases and takes out a lot of that instant gratification from purchases that you can get just because you have to consider them so carefully. But I'd also like to note, a year on after we've moved, I don't know about you, but the stuff that we've purged and gotten rid of, I don't miss any of it.
I could not write down most of the things that we got rid of. There was some big stuff, like furniture. Like I really loved that couch we had. But obviously, that wouldn't fit in our current house. And I love our couch that we have now. But aside from that, it's really difficult for me to pin down the items that I really miss. I think the biggest thing is the seasonal stuff. That's really hard we haven't quite figured that out. And by that, I mean, in the summer, I like to go golfing. So it's like, where am I going to put my golf clubs 10 months out of the year if I'm going to go golfing 2 months out of the year? Or you have a completely different wardrobe that you like to wear. And so I think finding creative ways to maximize the space is important, but it's also not a foolproof system. Like I keep my clubs in my trunk along with, my motorcycle gear that I just don't know what to do with, and my snowboarding gear is in my trunk as well, because there's just not enough room for, that extra stuff.
Yeah, there are concessions that have to be made, but it does really put our problem-solving skills to the test, I think, and where we're going to make room for the things that are essential, even when it's just sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think we've done a pretty good job.
I think we've done an amazing job. And I think most people who have seen our home, if not everybody, is very impressed with how we make something so small feel so big and feel as functional as it does. And it does feel functional. I don't feel like our space is small on the day to day. Sometimes I want to buy, a really nice, cool, big thing or find a decoration that I want to add to our home. And yeah, I just can't make it happen. But for the most part, it's completely doable for us.
Well, and one thing that, I appreciate about our smaller living space and, like we said, the intention behind purchases is that it makes you appreciate the things that you have. So, everything in our house, we had to make a space for. We had to really decide where that was going to go, either part-time or full-time, and that makes you appreciate that item because there are so many items that we purged and chose not to figure out something to do with. But, the items that we kept, we can say that we have a lot of value in them, and it makes you appreciate them.
You mean like your box of rocks?
Yes, exactly like my box of rocks.
When we were moving in, we had a buddy, Jeremy, a friend of the show, help us move out here. And, we're unloading the trucks. And he pulls this really heavy box out of his truck. We've driven the last 17 and a half hours. He looks down at it and it says, box of rocks. He's like, Alexa, where do you want your box of rocks that we couldn't live without, moving 17 hours away? And
They've been here for millions of years. They're not going anywhere.
Fair enough. I wanted to maybe transition at this time into something that's a little bit more personal about you and I. Listeners of the show know that I am diagnosed ADHD. I am on Adderall at this point. And a big thing about me is that a lot of my habits that I try to mask in public settings, they definitely come out when I'm at home where I'm feeling comfortable and safe, around my partner. And surprise, Alexa is also neurodivergent.
Yeah, so I also have been diagnosed with ADHD and bipolar 2 disorder, which is also a spicy brain component. So I'm double spicy brained. Pretty much as soon as we moved in together, we realized how neurodivergent the other is.
Yeah, we had to make a lot of changes to make our living space work. Otherwise, I think, we'd be fighting constantly about just the status of our home. Me, I am a chronic, I lose everything kind of person. And I also put things down without even thinking about it. So things like my keys, my wallet, my sunglasses, when I come into the house, it's just everything's flying everywhere. My clothes are going in different places. There's just really no sense of organization there. And it's not a conscious decision that I make. When we first got together, it was every single day, right? Where you and I were having to look for my keys before I go to work.
Keys, yes.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that was frustrating for you. And so now when you look at our house, you can see that we've made some changes based off of that neurodivergent trait. We have a key holder, in the trailer, right when you walk in the door, you can hang your keys right there. And that may be something that a lot of people can relate to. Where we put our key holder in the shed is a completely different story.
That kind of came about because we had the obvious key holder right at the opening of our home in the trailer, but that was not usually where your keys ended up. And one of the big things about being neurodivergent and trying to build better habits is also making your habits work for you. And so you were working really hard. I saw you on making that habit of putting your keys where they belonged, but I also saw that it was working directly against your natural instinct that maybe isn't the same as everyone else's. Your routine is often to end up taking off your dirty socks and your dirty clothes from work in the closet. And because you do that, you empty your pockets and set stuff on the drawer set that we have in there. And that's something that I noticed. And I think it was something that was frustrating you about yourself because you weren't always putting your keys where they quote unquote are supposed to be. By kind of changing that and making somewhere that you naturally go to put your keys anyways an official spot and just sticking a hook in there above the shelving that you set your keys on, I think that it not only helped reaffirm the habit of putting your keys on a hook, whether it's in here or in the trailer, but it just made sense. And with traits like that, you can get frustrated with yourself about them, but it doesn't tend to change them, or you can make those habits work for you.
Yeah, and that was something I'd never really even conceptually thought of. And once you put those hooks up in the closet, this little light goes off in my head, and I said, oh, she has been watching me struggle through this, and she just cracked the code. That was 8 months ago. And I can't remember the last time that I actually lost my keys. Every once in a while I'll lay down on the couch and then they get lost in the cushions. But I think that's something everybody experiences. But my keys end up right where they need to go every single day because, I have these routines and it's just really about making those routines work for me. Let's talk about containers because you are the container queen.
I am the container queen. And just for some context for listeners, I love to get my containers from everywhere. but a lot of times I just go to the dollar store and I will look at their containers and I will sit there and think about where I could possibly use this container. And even if there's a slight chance that I could use it, I will probably buy it. I have some containers sitting in my car right now.
I bet it's like 3 or 4 bags worth.
So yeah, I have this container thing where anytime I go to the dollar store, it's like you can smell them on me. It's like, where are those containers that you bought?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love containers. They contain things so well.
She started hyper-focusing on, how to maximize space. And I bet every single source that you were reading about or thinking about was all saying, find containers and contain the mess, basically. And you definitely did the container thing. In our closet, right next to where we keep our keys, there is a little metal container, and it doesn't have a label on it or anything, but I think both of us know that that's where Connor's pocket stuff goes.
Yes, similar story as the hook. You were setting your stuff right on that space, but it kind of rolls around everywhere. You might have chapstick or coins or, random things. And so you got to contain those things. It makes sense. It's right in the name.
We also have 2 containers next to Connor's pocket container. We have a Connor container and we have an Alexa container. And this is for our, day-to-day clutter, I think.
Yeah, kind of bits and bobbles. I came up with that idea because there are always things that maybe don't have a place or don't belong in their place at that moment. But our space is so precious and so, little that we can't just have things laying around. It makes everything look messy and it feels cluttered and it's stressful and things disappear. So the 2 babe boxes, one for me, one for him, are for things that you just don't know where they go right then. And the idea is that you clean it out once or twice a month, to kind of get things into their belonging space without them infringing on other space. But we are neurodivergent, so we do currently have 2 full babe boxes.
We do have 2 full babe boxes. Yours is more full, though.
It is.
The biggest thing about small living that I would say is that it actually helps you be more clean. I am not a very clean person, and I still have a long way to go in my cleaning grow up phase. Or maybe my cleaning glow up phase.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah, but the biggest thing for me is I hate clutter. And when you have even a pair of socks or a pair of shoes or a dog toy or, a small stack of envelopes from mail that you haven't decided to look at yet, anything even small like that looks gigantic when you're talking about a small space. So the babe boxes, I think, really helped us, because I don't know where her lipstick goes and I don't know where her 4th phone charger goes or whatever. And I'm sure you don't know where, my Magic the Gathering cards go either. So I think these babe boxes really kind of help us contain the, the little things on the day to day.
Yeah, it's a good way to consolidate random things that you just have throughout the day. Or also, if something belongs in our other space in the trailer. Sounds lazy, but it is a barrier to getting things done, having to move from one building to a different building, even though they're right next to each other. So having somewhere to put things that maybe belong in the trailer before I go put them away keeps our space tidier.
What else? Our calendar. Our calendar is still set to May, and there's nothing written on it except for date night on, May 28th or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, that's the thing about, neurodivergent solutions is sometimes they don't work or it is a lot of growing pains, because I think that a good strategy is to, try something. If it doesn't work, figure out why it's not working and use that to rebuild a strategy,
Yeah, and that's not always easy. Neither of us are very good at lists or, big planning our weeks out in advance. So when it comes to like grocery shopping and stuff, we have our list just like everybody else, but it says milk on it from 2 months ago, 3 months ago.
Yes.
I mean, we've gotten milk, but we didn't go back and, erase it off the board. I think that we do a pretty good job overall.
I agree. And I think, it's really a great example of how a neurodivergent brain works compared to neurotypical brains. Just because I feel like a lot of the things that we've talked about in some ways either sound lazy or maybe, common sense.
But it's not. It's not common sense. Yeah,
it's not.
It's strange.
Yeah, it's really not. And I think it is a good commentary on how simpler things or things that might seem common sense not working for you is a pretty common theme. And, that's why it's hard sometimes to hold a job as a neurodivergent person, to make friends and connections as a neurodivergent person, is because people don't understand that your brain actually just works differently and that society was not built around the way that our brains work.
You want to talk about things that should be common sense but are, chronically impossible. I have never gotten the brushing your teeth twice a day thing down in my entire life. I want to have healthy teeth and I tell myself to have healthy teeth, but sometimes when it comes to brushing my teeth, it is just this task that is like climbing Mount Everest. And it's really hard to put into words exactly why I feel that way, because I don't want to have stinky breath around my friends or my podcast partner here. But it can be really difficult to actually do that task. And so, again, thinking in a neurodivergent way, or maybe trying to think outside of the box, Alexa and I have kind of found a solution to that works for both of us.
Yes, we do. Well, we have probably, what did you say, 8 toothbrushes between the two of us. So we have, of course, our toothbrush by the sink in the shed, which is where we do most of our personal grooming because it's our real bathroom. But we do also have toothbrushes for each of us in our trailer bathroom. Mm-hmm. Additionally, about 2 feet from our toothbrushes on the sink, we have our toothbrushes in the shower.
Yep. So again, each of these have their own toothpaste. It's not like we're moving toothpaste around these different spots. We have toothbrushes and toothpaste in these different strategic places because, when I get home from work, the last thing I want to do is brush my teeth. I want to get out of my stinky work clothes and I want to go take a shower. But guess what? When I'm in the shower and I'm waiting for my conditioner to settle in, why not brush my teeth? It's already in there. It just kind of takes away that barrier of doing those things. Same thing if I am in the trailer and I just ate a big breakfast and I want to go back to bed. It's great because I already have a toothbrush in there. I can brush my teeth, go back to bed. Everywhere I look, there's a toothbrush. And I think that really helps, form those good habits.
Well, and, building on that, removing barriers is huge, because it is those smaller things that make you less likely to complete a task. And it is hard to kind of put it in words for people with neurotypical brains. But by removing those barriers of, I'm in the warm shower and I just remembered I need to brush my teeth, but I don't want to have to reach out and get the floor all wet and the sink all wet and try and grab my stuff and it's cold out there. Just having your toothbrush right there when you think, you know what, I have the ticket right now is what you need to look for, is how can you remove those barriers before they happen.
And do you think that neurotypical people can take advice from kind of how we do things?
Yeah, I absolutely think they can. Both in an advice sense, but also in a way to better understand the people around them. We say neurotypical and neurodivergent because those are some of the more official words, but there's such variation in the human mind, and I think that, having different ways of thinking is an asset. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a hindrance. And so I think being able to look at challenges in a different way is absolutely helpful. I think that we can, all learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to sum things up. So looks like we're out of time for the day. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on or any other last, thoughts come into your mind before we get out of here and go eat some crab?
Forgot about the crab. No, I think this has been great. I enjoyed being on the podcast. I can't wait for my next topic, but this one was a great introduction, just because it's something that we both, hold close to our hearts, obviously. So thank you for having me on and coming up with this idea, because I think it was a great one.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what you cook up. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Okay.
No.
It's all good. All right.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Unmentionables cast, your weekly bite-sized dose of nonsense. If you liked the show, tell your friends. And if you didn't, well, recommend us to your adversaries and we'll torture them on your behalf. If you want to get in contact with us, send all questions, comments, concerns, issues, problems, and suggestions to the unmentionablescast@gmail.com. The show will always be free, but if you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/theunmentionables. Don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, thumbs up, or ring a bell to help pump up those juicy stats for us, and we'll catch you next week.
Big key, in my opinion, to making your habits work for you or making life easier with a neurodivergent brain, just because I forgot where I was going.
That's okay. That's okay. That's what post is for.
For sure. Right.
Or maybe I'll just leave it in.
No. This is my first time. Be gentle.